Da 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 da! What's my good cheer? Welcome, everybody. Bedtime story time, I guess, tonight. I'm in my pajamas, ready to crawl into bed. And for those of you who've hung out with me for any length of time, you know I'm actually in a sleep routine, or supposed to be right now in preparation for this holiday that I've put together. In less than a week, we are going to be on the road for 2 weeks. I don't know. I am a crazy lady, but I do believe it's going to be exciting. It's going to be super fun. It's going to be content for my brand. It's going to be movement forward for myself. And it's time with myself. It's going to be something else. You can see the big mess behind me, and it's truly not a mess. It's just where I've decided to store all my gear in order to keep it in one place. You'd be proud of me today because I did not add anything to these piles. Maybe tomorrow. Today, I was just spending with myself for the most part. I didn't even look at really doing any chores. I made a few calls or messages, sent that out there. And I took in lessons and I took in some light content today. And I took it easy. As usual, Sunday nights is usually a night of Charlie horses. I have to do better by myself on the weekend. I have to be that example when I say, right, I'm trying to create the best human being I possibly can. And yet, when I know that I need to take in more water on the weekends, that I work hard and I expend a lot of energy, that right, that I have to take care of myself to make sure that at the very least I'm sleeping well. It was a day off today, right? It's okay for me to be tired. And I could have slept in if I had wanted to. But again, right, sometimes we do hold ourselves accountable, everybody. I'm keeping myself busy because there is this nervous tingling of excitement as we get closer to being on the road. When those wrenches get thrown into the plans, isn't fun in maneuvering when you want to not have a nervous excitement, but have an excited excitement, like full of anticipation and rearing to go, right? Like you're behind a gate just waiting for somebody to lift that gate up. But for me at this point, right, like I said, I have been running on fumes, I do believe, for at least a month now. But that's the thing, when you set goals based on your desires, those are your sticks with the prize at the end of it. And so when you get to that point when you're tired and bagged and you're ready to give up, you do have that bag. You do have that something to look forward to, right? In congratulations for maybe not a job well done, but it's for the very least not giving up, for giving it whatever you had, whatever it was, right? Today, I wasn't giving too much, but I was receiving in that. I was receiving some rest for my body, right? I worked hard this weekend, taking in the fluids, even though this fluid right at the moment is a cup of coffee. When I go live, I always like to have a cup of coffee. Part of, it is part of my show here. It is that connection, like when you go to your next door neighbors for a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. This is, what the cup of coffee represents for me. It's like me sitting down here with my best friend or with my sisters, and we're having a chit chat, having a cup of coffee, possibly making a little bit of movement in the meantime, just in that easy conversation that sometimes doesn't trigger us in a bad way, but just trigger us to kind of, right? To think about something or to give something another thought at the very least. Today, I was in the subject of guilt and shame. And, I put guilt and shame as two words, even though those two words actually sound quite similar, Don't they? Guilt and shame. Guilt is actually a good thing. Guilt is something that kind of gives you direction in something that, right, you maybe shouldn't have done. You've gone in the wrong direction. You put your hand in the wrong jar. You hurt somebody's feelings. You didn't do your fair share. That's guilt. That's your conscience. That's right. That's you just giving yourself a reminder of you could have done a little bit better. Is there anything you could do in this moment to rectify, right? Whatever it was that didn't go over so well. Shame is a totally different beast in itself. I come from shame-based parenting myself. It was one of my mother's favorite tools in maneuvering, especially me. I don't remember specifically if she used that technique on my other sisters, but then again, I was very hyper focused on my own safety and in my own relationship with my mother. It didn't expand too much outside of that, unless, one of my sisters were, right, teaming up with her to mess with my life. And that happened on a lot of occasions. And I am grateful that I recognized that. I'm grateful for my father, who was the evidence that kind of made it possible for me to tell the difference between right and wrong and somebody's intent. That was something I always really felt strongly about. But that was because, again, in that hypervigilance and that safety for my own self, that we pick up a few of these treats, and they serve us well throughout our life, but they also sometimes become the wrench or the rock that kind of gets thrown into that engine. You know, Shame, that was a big one in my family, especially when my father was so sick and my mother knew, right? I was very codependent on my father. My mother knew very much, right? I was like one of those little dogs that you couldn't shake off your leg. It would just cling to your leg when my father was home. And he wasn't always home. He wasn't home a lot because he was a commercial fisherman. He went away for months at a time. He also, right, he drove his cabs during the night shifts and he would sleep all day. We didn't get to see a lot of our father growing up, but he was my safe zone. And he was somebody that I could feel like I could be myself. And through my interactions with my father, through that guidance and natural parenting that my father did, some of those lessons must have sunk through because I don't remember him having any of these kind of conversations with me. In all honesty, I mean, there was that parental advice, but that was parental advice. It wasn't in that community of well-being, right? And sometimes we kind of miss the boat in taking care of ourselves or even recognizing that there's a possibility of taking care of ourselves, or sometimes even the permission, right? Sometimes we're looking for other people to give us a permission or to say, go here or do this, right? And I was that person, but I was also that person to sort of say, let me do this. I got that, right? Because again, that's in my hypervigilance to do that forward thinking, to think of those trip ups, to think of those wrenches and those rocks that were being thrown into the engine and like clear the path. And not even clearing the path for myself. That's just the most ridiculous thing that I've woken up to in all of this is none of that was for me. It was my hypervigilance. It was in calming other people's systems down and avoiding, and this is where we come to the guilt and shame and the verses, guilt versus shame, was that shame that was projected onto me in being responsible for my father's well-being, right? My father had congenital heart disease. He had hardening of the arteries. He had serious blood pressure problems. He had angina, and he had many strokes constantly. He wasn't expected to live to be much past his 20s. He never in his wildest dreams that he thought he'd live long enough to get married and have children, and yet he did, right? And sometimes in those relationships that we have with each other, we look to see what makes us feel good, right? What looks to us to make us feel like we belong, right? That we have something of value to give. And yet we can't be ourselves because we have these other parts of ourselves that we're hiding because we're told, right? Don't say anything to your father. You're going to give him a heart attack, right? Look at that angina episode he had. You almost killed him. And I would wear that blame and shame in that. Right? I was a kid. I didn't quite understand tactics of maneuvering and parenting in different dynamic ways. But I certainly recognize the intent in that, but I didn't think it any less true because my father was the evidence that he was having these angina attacks, that he was very, very sick, and there was that possibility, right? I wasn't going to take a chance with that. And he was the one person that I could talk to. But there were things that I couldn't talk to him because his very life depended on it. My own salvation of not being responsible for him dying because I've upset him with talking to him about these dynamic relationships that I had within my own family. That's a pretty sad way to live. Did lots of damage in that. But I do believe I was meant to experience that. Those are the lessons for the future generations. There was a recent quote that I heard that our generation's ceiling is the next generation's floor, right? So these understandings and these trip ups and these mistakes that we make in our lives, they're supposed to be the directions. They're supposed to take our curiosity to places to say, how can we do better? And how did that affect us? And what if we had done this? Or what if we had said this? Right? But a past opportunity that we've missed, it doesn't very often, in all truth, come across our path again, unless there is a hand in that. So if it does come across your path a second, a third, a fourth time, oh my goodness, you should be on it. I should be on it. And this is usually how I get to the point of absorbing the lessons because very rarely do I catch the lessons the first time. Lots of times I catch the lesson, I'm going, oh my goodness, is that what they've been talking about? This thing that I tripped me up for the past 6 years? That's what they're talking about, right? So lots of times it is in that interaction that we have with others, right? That misery loves company, that resentment and envy, jealousy. Sometimes it's in the fear of losing something to someone else. And I do believe that was the case because it was a very special relationship that I had with my father. My mother never experienced those relationships within her parenting with her mother and father. And we talked about it a few times when I tried to delve in a little bit deeply about the relationship that we had. I did, right? And she tried the best that she could to answer those questions in an honest way because she knew it was important in my movement forward. She recognized, I do believe, in the end, some of that misstepping in her life that she had done in that relationship with me. But I heard too, right? I was a tit for tat. I was you get what you give. I was an eye for an eye. You don't like me, fine. I don't like you, right? But I always practiced that respect of your mother and father, right? I did believe that if I had spilled the beans and what truly was happening, and I wasn't, nobody was pulling any wool over my father's eyes. He knew exactly what was going on. And not to use his sensitivity as an excuse. Maybe I am. Maybe it's the only way that I can digest that my father knew what was going on, and all he could do was support me in those few fatherly conversations that he had with me and not really step in and stop the situation from happening. Right? Maybe that was his shame that he carried. Right? When I came in live tonight, I wasn't expecting to talk about guilt and shame, but it was a recent lesson that I had had in the past few hours, and it did make an impact on me, even though I knew it anyway, right? And it's because I feel intent, right? If somebody's intenting maliciousness or something not good, that's not good, is it? You know, sometimes people hurt our feelings, right? They say something really stupid. My sister would do it all the time. She'd go, oh my goodness, Cindy, what did you do to your hair today? It looks like you just crawled out of bed, right? My sister was very, very controlling, a little bit narcissistic, but I expect that kind of stuff to come out of my sister's mouth. And so a lot of the stuff I was able just to brush it aside because I got the intent. I got that hurt people. I got that, sunshine irritates the dark. And if you're in your dark, you don't want somebody smiling, right? Not when you're crying on the inside or, you're struggling with something, right? It doesn't make you feel good to see the happiness and the joy and the calmness and the ease of life around you. I get it. I didn't get it, right? And maybe that was where my issues lay and not turning the other cheek because I was in that face. I was making sure that there was a lesson heard, even if there was nothing that I could do. I wanted you to know that I knew, right? I felt the intent, and I was going to let you know, right? And it's not like people didn't know, right? Because guilt, you can't deny it. Guilt is the truth. Guilt is the indicator, right? Guilt is not a bad thing, and that's the truth. Unless you're found guilty and sent to prison for life for a crime you didn't commit, right? But you would feel that, and you would have fought that. You would have seen every single lawyer, right? In every breath, you would have died and declared your innocence, right? But what about somebody who doesn't have that defense about them, right? That only has that that projection on them. Right? If you're going to say something, you're going to hurt somebody. You're going to mess things up. You're going to make your dad upset. You're going to kill him. He's going to end up in the hospital at the very least. And it's going to be all your fault. Look what you've done. For lots of people with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and that's the trauma that we receive in our childhood from some of those dynamic relationships and upbringings that we have, right? Not everybody, and very few, if any, are perfect. We are really so far in our evolution in that. But in this moment, we do have understandings, don't we? And these answers are out there. These were YouTube videos that I was taking in today that totally opened up my eyes, right? To what's been going on in my life. And, I make my movement by that, right? I make those choices in my life, right? I make those choices in the creation of the best human being. I use those lessons. I utilize those lessons. And I feel out the intent, right? So I'm using my own noggin, my own heart, my own sense of understanding to feel what's true for me. And not just true for me, but just true. So I don't get stuck in that position again of being dictated to just so that somebody else is coming out smelling like roses. And that's the truth. Now, I don't know why I got on that topic, like I said, except it was a video that I watched today that just kind of hit home with me a little bit, gave me some time to contemplate on it as I was doing pretty much nothing, right? Basics, make your bed, do some dishes, sweep the floor. But taking in the lessons and making movement anyway. I made movement today anyway, right? It wasn't for Cindy, but but it was for Cindy because I'm going to utilize those tools in my own existence, in my own life. But I tell you, those other parts of me, oh yeah, they're ready to move. But I can guarantee when I go back into my main page, there'll be all kinds of, of content for me on that topic specifically of guilt and shame, ready for me to munch on if I choose to, right? And usually when I have one of those moments of understanding, I gotta know a little bit more. I gotta go a little bit deeper because these are the lessons, these are the conversations that we have, right? That I share here, right? Not just for myself. I show up here to share what I've learned in the optimistic idea that they might be useful for somebody else, right? Could have been in a very different place. And you might think, oh my goodness, look at your little apartment, right? Look at where you are in your life right now. I'm looking right now and I see the stacks stacking 100%. I'm not looking at what's not moving. I'm looking at what is moving. Okay, you guys. That's my good cheer. I'm out of here. We'll see you tomorrow.